Chapter 1 summary. A fair boy and a fat boy kind of wake up or on a beach, and they're trying to figure out what happened. We hear some talk about a plane, a pilot, but ultimately kind of realize there's not adults on the island, and there was some sort of a crash. They mention a scar on the beach, which took me some time to figure out what that meant. But I think that it's like the what was left after like the plane had crashed, so just like a mark in the sand where the plane had gone. They talked about the plane kind of splitting in two. And we find out that the fair-haired boy is named Ralph, and then the fat boy says that we never find out his actual name. He says that he used to be called Piggy at his school, I suspect. He does not like that name. He asks Ralph to not tell people that name. Then they kind of look around the island or beach. We don't know it's an island yet. And do some swimming, talk about their families. Ralph's dad is in the Navy. Piggy's dad is dead. Ralph is convinced that his dad will come rescue him. Piggy lives with his aunt, and he's got asthma. And there's a couple of places where he says that he's not allowed to swim, run because of the asthma. He also eats like too much fruit, which makes him sick. He's like has diarrhea, which don't know why that's in this chapter, but it is. So I think perhaps it's just a means of creating the character of Piggy, of this kind of awkward but smart boy. So then they find this conch shell, and I don't have a conch shell. I have this abalone, which I might use as a prop. But what they do is they use the conch shell to they blow it like a horn, and everybody comes running, or all the other people on the island. Then Piggy suggests that they take people's names, and they make a list of names. And Ralph kind of carries this out. So far there's a lot of things that have been Piggy's idea, but Ralph is the one that's actually doing them. We get introduced to Sam and Eric, who are twins. And a little boy named Johnny, and then we don't hear the names of many of the other children. It seems like they range in age. Then we see this kind of mass, black, like dark shadow coming towards them, which turns out to be a line of boys dressed in cloaks, and they're a choir. So I'm guessing they've come from some sort of boarding school. They may or may have already known each other. One of the boys faints, and that boy is named Simon. And then there's the leader of the choir, whose name is Jack Meridew. He asked to be called by his last name, just like Piggy. That is not what happens. People call him Jack. So then, interestingly, Jack calls Piggy Fatty, and Ralph goes, he's not Fatty, his real name's Piggy. And Piggy's like, no, I don't want to be called that. But I think that in that scenario, Ralph was actually trying to defend him. He just didn't know his name, and it kind of like came out of his mouth. So we are also introduced to Maurice, who's a big kid, and Roger, who are both part of this choir. Then they decide that they want to vote. So they decide to vote for a chief. And it talks about how Jack is the natural leader. Piggy's definitely the smartest, but for some reason they choose Ralph. And in the book, the quote is, there was a stillness about Ralph as he sat that marked him out. There was his size and attractive appearance, and most obscurely, yet most powerfully, there was the conch. So they're choosing him because he's good looking. They're choosing him because he's calm. But most importantly, they're choosing him because he has a conch shell. So this conch shell is already having some power over the boys. They come when it is blown, and they vote for the leader who has it. So then they determine that Jack's crew is going to be hunters. And then they decide that they need to go explore and decide if they're actually on an island. So Ralph decides to go with Jack, and they also ask Simon. So Simon was the one that fainted, and so far we have no indication of like why would they choose Simon, but they did. So he's small, quiet. So Simon and Ralph and Jack all go off to see if there's an island. During this trip, they're kind of having fun. They're kind of and there's several times where it kind of mentions like, well, why is this fun? We're lost on an island, but they kind of were roughhousing, jumping around, and having a good time. Towards then, they kind of like walk around the island. They discover that it is an island. There's a lot more description here. There's a great place to look for your imagery examples. And then then they find a piglet. So this is where things get a little bit dark. So Jack has this knife, and he holds his knife up, but he decides ultimately not to kill the piglet. He's like, next time I'm going to do it, blah, 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 blah. He's like, oh yeah, it was just like, I was just choosing like a place to stick it in, but like, I just didn't know where to stab him. And, but really they talk about, let's see. It says they knew on page 31, it says they knew very well why he hadn't, because of the enormity of the knife descending and cutting into living flesh, because of the unbearable blood. So at this point, Jack is still a little afraid to kill a pig. So that's how the chapter ends. And our main characters that we're going to have to look out for are going to be Ralph, Jack, Piggy. Simon does come up a lot. My favorite character, just saying. Roger comes up again, and so do Sam and Eric, the twins. So great places to find some examples of imagery in this chapter are in the first 6 or 7 pages, where they try to describe the beach, and then when Jack, Simon, and Ralph are exploring a little bit more, have some good examples of imagery. And then when we talk about id, ego, and superego, the conch shell definitely is kind of superego, right? Because it's still trying to, it maintains a little bit of structure for the first time since they've crashed, right? It's like that has this power almost. And then id, like when their boys are when they're at the beginning, when Ralph and Piggy are swimming, that's a little bit of id, because it's kind of giving into that animalistic side of them that are like, there are no adults here, yay, like let's have fun. And when like Jack, Ralph, and Simon are like messing around, climbing up the mountain, and then Piggy is also a little bit more superego, right? He's still thinking about his aunt back at home telling him not to swim, telling him not to run, right? Those rules, those regulations, those things that are preventing him from doing the fun things that Ralph is doing. He's the one that's kind of thinking clearly and logically about consequences. So he wants to collect the names of all the people, all the kids on the island, presumably because he wants to know who's there. And so if they do get rescued, they kind of know who survived the crash, and they can maybe share it with their families, something like that. Ego's a little bit more tricky in this chapter. I think that there's a part where Jack decides not to kill the pig, right? The killing the pig would be the id. The superego is society telling him that that's wrong to kill. And then the ego is that part of him that's like wrestling between the two. Another example of ego is when Ralph is upset about having called him Piggy, about having called Piggy Piggy, and he says, because Piggy confronts him and he's like, hey, I told you not to do that. And it says, stillness descended on them. Ralph, looking with more understanding at Piggy, saw that he was hurt and crushed. He hovered between the two courses of apology or further insult. Better Piggy than Fatty, he said at last, with a direct list of genuine leadership. And anyway, I'm sorry if you feel like that. Now go back, Piggy, and take names. That's your job. So long. So the part where he's deciding, it's like he's deciding between the part of him, super ego, that knows the right thing to do, and the part of him that wants to maybe fit in with Jack, who is clearly, he's got this like coolness to him that the boys kind of look up to. And I think Ralph's trying to figure out where he fits in there. So there's chapter 1 for you. And see you next week for chapter 2.